The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not on the side of God, but of men. Then Jesus told his disciples, If any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his life? Or what shall a man give in return for his life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay every man for what he has done. The Gospel of the Lord. My dear brothers and sisters, this Sunday we could all exclaim, Poor Peter! Poor Peter! In last Sunday's Gospel reading, we saw Jesus declaring him blessed and naming him the rock on which he intends to build his church. Today's Gospel, however, presents us with a very different portrait of Peter. Instead of being the rock upon which he will build his church, Jesus now calls him a tempter, an obstacle in the path he must take to fulfill his mission. What a put down for Peter! What a disaster! He must have been on a high after the extraordinary accolade he had received from his master. How could this passionate and outspoken disciple now suddenly become a stumbling block for Jesus? While Peter had recognized and openly acknowledged that Jesus was indeed the promised Messiah, the one sent by God to establish his kingdom on earth, he did not understand any more than his companions what this would mean for Jesus. He expected Jesus to defeat the enemies of Israel and become king of a free and sovereign people. So when Jesus tells his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised, Peter is shocked. He cannot believe in his ears. His very human and understandable response is to try to persuade his master from risking his life. Peter's words almost sound like a prayer. Heaven preserve you, Lord. This must not happen to you. But Jesus emphatically rejects Peter's natural concern for his master's safety. Go behind me, Satan. He called Peter Satan. Go behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle in my path. Because the way you think is not God's way, but man's. My dear brothers and sisters, if we are really honest with ourselves, it is the vehemence of Jesus' reply rather than Peter's words that we find shocking. Would we not, like Peter, be similarly concerned for the safety of those we love? We should have done the same thing as Peter. We should have said the same words as Peter, because we are concerned with the person we love. We wouldn't want them to become hapless victims of their enemies, the evil desires of their enemies. We just wanted to protect our beloved. Why then does Jesus react so strongly to Peter and call him Satan? Go behind me, Satan. My dear brothers and sisters, to understand his reaction, we need to recall an earlier scene at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, where he retreats into the wilderness to prepare for the mission entrusted to him by his Father. There, he rejects the temptation of Satan, who promises him victory over the world through wealth and power. From that moment, Jesus knew and accepted that his mission would involve suffering and death. Now, Peter unwittingly becomes an ally of Satan in seeking to deflect him from his chosen path, the path that would lead to the cross. Hence, his vehement rejection of Peter's plea. Jesus knew that to establish God's kingdom on earth would entail the defeat of the powers of evil in the world. But those powers would not be overcome by military might, but by enduring their destructive force with love, thus exposing them for what they were. Peter and his companion wanted a kingdom without suffering. Peter and his companions wanted a kingdom, a glory without the cross. Jesus wants his disciples to be under no illusion about what following him will mean. It will be no promise of chocolates and roses, but a costly discipleship involving self-sacrifice and the cross. We all have to pass by the sacrifice and the cross to attain glory. If anyone wants to be a follower of mine, says Jesus, let him renounce himself and take up his cross and follow me. For anyone who wants to save his life will lose it. But anyone who loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will find it. My dear brothers and sisters, these words are as challenging for us today as they were for Peter and his companions. They shake us out of our tendency to settle for a comfortable and conforming religion. They unmask our evasions, our double standards, our desire for cheap grace, our reluctance to involve ourselves in sacrifice, because we don't like to be disturbed by suffering, by the cross. So we want to stay in our comfort zones. But the renunciation Jesus is calling for goes much further than our annual Lenten observance of denying ourselves our favorite foods or taking on a few penitential practices. My dear brothers and sisters, it involves, as St. Paul reminds us in our second reading, developing a new way of seeing life and changing our behavior accordingly. The instruction of Paul is very clear. Do not model yourselves on the behavior of the world around you. It's not because it's popular and we are in. Paul says, do not model yourselves on the behavior of the world around you, but let your behavior change, modeled by your new mind. That means modeled after the will of God. Becoming disciples of Jesus means learning to think the way God thinks, rather than the way we humans usually think. And that will be for us, as it was for Peter and his disciples, a lifelong process of ups and downs, successes and failures. There may be times when we feel a bit like Jeremiah in our first reading today, chosen by God to be his prophet to the nations, Fidelity to his calling made him a daily laughing stock and brought him insult and derision all day long. Though tempted to stop being a spokesman of the Lord, he could not give up because, as he states himself, there seemed to be a fire burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. So he could not just stop being a prophet of God because he felt that flame, that zeal in his heart, even though everybody is mocking at him, even though he was suffering all day long, but he cannot stop. Jeremiah had been, as he states, seduced by God, and he had let himself be seduced. In other words, he had fallen in love with God, so that nothing could stop him from doing God's will, no matter where this might lead him. My dear brethren, the example of Jeremiah prompts us to ask ourselves the question: have we let ourselves be seduced by Christ so that we persevere in following and serving Him regardless of the consequences? Our heart will have the response for that question. The Lord be with you.